What is good, as I said, to see each of you here today. 4th of July weekend is always an interesting one as far as who's going to make it and who's going to not, but it is great to be with you. And I was actually kind of debating about doing more 4th of July message, but in the end, I decided that I wanted to keep going with our topic, as we have been in the summer of Samson here for the past couple of weeks, and I thought, you know what, this is actually fitting, right? We study Samson as he fights for Israel's freedom against the Philistines and King George, minus the last part, but so that's what we remember today as we think about that. And we had someone here fighting for that independence all these years ago. We're going to be in chapter 15 today. I originally planned to go all the way through chapter 15, and then as I was working on it, I realized if I went all the way through chapter 15, we would still be here today at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we're going to not finish all of chapter 15, but we will be looking at Judges chapter 15 today, and we will be looking at the first 9 verses of that. And I have truly enjoyed this study into the book of Judges, this study of Samson. I enjoyed this series so far. It's always interesting when we really get to kind of dig in and do a deep dive into some of these Bible characters that we maybe spent a lot of time with as children, but don't always spend a lot of time with as adults. Last summer, of course, we did a summer of Joseph. This summer, the summer of Samson. And next summer, well, we'll see where that leads us. But we always, I think, find that there's a lot more there than we first thought about. If you were here last week, I said one of the exciting things I like about Samson is the fact that I think he's a guy that's easy for us to understand. Right? In some ways, Samson's a little more relatable. Right? Sometimes we start reading about those great heroes of the faith, and they do seem to be just a little above me. Right? You're like, oh, David, Abraham, Moses. I say a little jokingly because I couldn't jump to achieve the things they did, you know? A friend of God, a man after God's own heart, saw the face of God, and you read these stories and you're like, wow, that's great, but they are like almost perfect. I mean, I'm a long ways from almost perfect. Right? And we read about people like Samson, we realize that guy's a regular guy. That guy's like the rest of us. He has his ups and he has his downs. That's why I tend to fluctuate more towards guys like Peter or Solomon or Samson, and we get these people who seem to be much more normal people. Right? Samson doesn't seem to belong with the special saints when he's listed as the heroes of the faith. He belongs, it seems like, in the regular guys of faith. Right? Maybe the irregular guys of faith. He's a strange one. But Samson is a man whose life is a little more understandable, right? It's kind of a spiritual zigzag as he's up and he's down and he's left and he's right. He's unpredictable, and that makes the stories, I think, exciting. We've seen his beginning, how Samson had it all. No Bible character ever started with more, right? Samson was promised from the angels. We learned it was a theophany. The very Son of God, the angel of the Lord, was there to pronounce that he was going to be born and that he was going to help lead the people out from the rule of the Philistines. And we can kind of trace God's purpose in his life, starting all the way back there. And Samson, time and time again, did fulfill God's purpose. Now, he didn't do it deliberately. Again, Samson was kind of a train wreck in some ways, we'd say today. But God continued to work through him. And yes, we know if we were here last week, Samson killed 30 Philistines. He took their clothes. Today, we're going to jump up that violence a notch. This is one of the amazing stories in Samson's life, the story of a man who started out so well and how he could travel so far away from the Lord. Right? His path down, of course, we looked at last week in Judges 14, went to the wrong place. He was looking for the wrong thing. He rejected godly counsel, and he continued in a wrong relationship. As we review that a little bit, we know that Samson, the man of God, went down to Timnah. It was the home of the Philistines, and he saw there a young Philistine woman. And apparently it was a very attractive young Philistine woman, because he saw her and he said, "She looks good in my eyes." And he was attracted to this Philistine woman, and although he didn't bother to get to know her at all, he went home and he said, "Dad, I saw a beautiful Philistine woman. I want to marry her. Go set that up." And although Dad tried to talk him out of it, Samson kind of had his mind wrapped around it. And Samson was pretty important guy, right? And so Samson kind of gets what Samson wants. And so we move into the time of the rehearsal dinner, and Samson is there, and they're having the rehearsal dinner at his future wife's place, and they've got this big feast. It's a 7-day feast, and he has been given some groomsmen, none of them Jewish, they're all Philistine. He's got 30 Philistine groomsmen there, and they're kind of all sitting around, and they're probably, they're enjoying the party, I guess we would say. And Samson is boasting with these Philistines, and they're joking around. He's kind of the life of the party as he decides he's going to give them a riddle. Right? And it would have been a common thing for them to give riddles back and forth and try to solve them. But Samson, believing he is superior in every way to these Philistines, decides he's going to give them a riddle, and he's going to attach a bet to it. And the bet is a big one. Right? The riddle competition is probably pretty normal. The size of the bet starts to get a little abnormal. Right? Essentially, Samson looks to his 30 groomsmen and he says, "Hey, if you can solve my riddle, I will go out and get each of you a brand new set of clothes and a new coat. But if you can't solve my riddle, you all have to get me a brand new set of clothes and a new coat." Essentially, that they would each get him one, so he would have 30 new sets of clothes with 30 coats if he won, and he would give that up if he lost. And he gives them 7 days. Why? Because it's ultimately an impossible riddle for them to get, because it's all about this honey that he ate out of a lion carcass when he killed a lion and hid it. So no one else knows about this lion that he killed, so ultimately no one else is going to get the riddle. He has set himself up for a victory. And the time starts to pass. And Samson's kind of laughing all the way to the bank. He's confident he's got them. The groomsmen, though, don't want to lose. Right? They are being humiliated by this Israeli guy in their own home territory. And so they go and they start putting the pressure on his future wife. And they said, "You've got to get us this answer." And she said, "I can't give you the answer. He hasn't even told me." And they say, "Well, you better figure it out. Because if you don't get us the answer, we are going to burn you and your father's house." Essentially, they are going to lock them inside the house and set the house on fire. They were not nice groomsmen. And so she starts putting on the waterworks, and for the next 3 days, she's kind of all teared up, begging Samson to give her the answer to the riddle. And as the time of the marriage approaches, right, Samson more and more wants her to stop crying because he wants to be the husband. And so he gives her the answer to the riddle. What he doesn't expect is she then runs off and tells the answer to the riddle to the 30 Philistine men, who come back and answer the riddle, and now Samson has lost the bet. Samson is upset, Samson is angry, Samson is embarrassed, Samson is humiliated. All the thoughts of love and romance have gone out of his mind, and he is so angry, and he's got to now provide these Philistines 30 sets of clothing, which he doesn't have. So he marches off to the next town over, and he murders 30 Philistine men. And he takes their clothing and their coats, and he goes back, and he throws them at his groomsmen, and he says, "Here you go, there's your clothing and your coats." And he's so mad, he doesn't even stick around to go through the wedding. He just heads back to his dad's house because he is furious. Right, so now we see Samson's anger has led him to do two things up to this point. Right, the first thing he does is he murders these 30 Philistines. The second thing he does is he leaves his wife standing at the altar. Now, he's got the wife left at the altar, the dad, the bride's father, he doesn't know what to do, and so he decides he's going to go ahead and marry her off to someone else. Well, who's the next guy standing there? It's the best man. And so he marries his daughter off to the best man, which seems a little bit cold-hearted of him, yes. But again, different day, different time. We've already had the whole wedding feast. Next groomsman up, he's going to go ahead and get the girl. And that's just the way it is. A different day and time. Now, that's where that leaves us with the story. Samson's went home again. His wife is married to his best friend. And he is going to start to have a change of heart. So if you have your Bibles with you and want to follow along, chapter 15 is where we're going to be at today. Chapter 15 of Judges. Judges 15, so don't look for Samson 15 because you're not going to find it. Judges chapter 15, and we are going to look at the first 9 verses. It says, after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a youngest goat. And he said, let me go to my wife into her room. But her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes. And he took torches, and he turned the foxes tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and the olive groves. And the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered and said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, since you would do this like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease. And so he attacked them, hip and thigh, with a great slaughter. And he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Now the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. So Samson's has now kind of taken a turn, and he's probably going to struggle to go back from where he's just went. Right? It started as something small. It started Samson was where he shouldn't be. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now it has turned into Samson essentially ripping people apart limb from limb, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's see how it all gets to that point. We start with a goat says, I'm sorry. Right? Verse 15. After a while, or verse 1, chapter 15. After a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, let me go to my wife into her room. But her father would not permit him to go in. And her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. So we're at the time of the wheat harvest. Ultimately, we're at this time a few months have passed. Right? We're down a few months. We went from spring kind of till fall. And calmer heads, if you can call them that, have prevailed. And Samson is sitting at home in his father's house. And he looks around and he thinks to himself, I'd like to get my wife back. And so he decides he's going to head off and get her. Now today we might bring chocolates or flowers or perfume or candy or something else if we were going to try to say, hey honey, I'm really sorry, I messed up there, right? However, Samson brings a goat. And a goat seems to be a strange gift, but maybe it was a perfectly normal gift back then. I don't know. Everything about this story is strange. So we're going to assume that this is a perfectly normal gift to give somebody if you mess up, a goat. Husbands, you are free to try that sometime. Next time you mess up, bring your wife a goat. We'll see what happens. Maybe it'll be great for you. I don't know. Let me know how that goes. All right. Anyway, so Samson brings a young goat, and after that, he arrives back, and he gets to his father-in-law's house, and his father-in-law won't let him in. This whole scene is interesting, right? Samson leaves his wife at the altar, goes home, stews in it for a while, and ultimately believes he's still married. He's not seen his wife in 3 months or 4 months, however long exactly that is, but he ultimately believes that he's now going to go, and he wants to go to her room. And we're not going to go any more details there, but that's what Samson was thinking about. Right? And so he goes with the goat, and he's like, hey, I'm here. Where's my wife? And the dad's like, oh, yeah, don't go in there. She's with her husband. I married her off to somebody else. My bad. Right? Don't want to anger Samson, though. So he's like, hey, but, she's got a younger sister, and she's way better looking anyway. Which is kind of a mean thing for a dad to say, but again, a different time, right? In a time and age where you can bring goats as presents, you can also, as dad, say, hey, I married the older sister off, but go ahead, take a look at the younger sister. She's much prettier. Samson apparently did not think the younger sister was prettier, though. Was she? Was she not? I don't know. Samson was angry about this, though. Samson is upset that his wife is now married to another man, and Samson is upset that the dad would insult him and offer him another woman. He's in love, or so he thinks. He hasn't treated her as such, but that's what he believes. And so he basically says, this is off me, right? You brought this upon yourself. If anybody gets hurt here, that's on you. That's not on me, right? He's going to be held blameless, or so he says. And that leads us to our next point. Samson started the fire. Samson went and caught 300 foxes. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burnt up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and the olive groves. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Now, if you're not familiar with this story, we read this story, and this story sounds nuts. I'm not going to spend a ton of time with it. I covered it a couple years ago in The Greatest Story Seldom Told. It is one of my favorites, but it is definitely an interesting story. Samson goes out, he catches 300 foxes or jackals, depending on what translation you're using. The word is apparently pretty close. And he ties them in pairs, tail to tail. This seems like a difficult task. I don't know. Did he use string? Did he just tie the tails together? It doesn't tell us exactly. I don't know how difficult it would be. I imagine it would be very difficult. They probably wouldn't want to be tied together tail to tail. And then inside of each set of tails, he sticks a torch. So he now has 150 torch-ready fox teams. And he lights the torches on fire, and the foxes scatter. And as you can imagine, the foxes are scared of the fire, and they are running every which way, trying to get free of the fox that they're tied to. They can't. The fire stays right with them. And so they basically scatter northeast, southwest, in all directions, scared to death, lighting everything on fire. Samson has definitely upped his game a little bit. And he's basically there, and he's laughing maniacally as everything burns up. It says he burned up the shocks, the wheat that has already been cut. He burns up the standing grain, the wheat that hasn't been harvested yet. He burnt up the vineyards, and he burnt up the olive groves. Now, it's important to understand a little bit about the Philistines at this point in time, this day and age. The Philistines had 3 major cash crops that they exported and brought money into the country. And those cash crops were wheat, olives, and grapes. And so essentially, Samson, in burning everything up like this, takes out their entire economy. Right? Samson brings upon a Philistine depression because he wipes out all of their supply. He also wipes out all of their food, if we want to get right at it. And he single-handedly destroys this economic base of the country. Once again, as I said, God would continue to use Samson. God is going to bring down the Philistines using Samson, whether Samson likes it or not. And that's kind of exactly what is happening here. And not surprisingly, the Philistines are not happy. They ask who did this. Someone tells them it was Samson who had done it because Samson's father-in-law had given his wife to his friend. And so the Philistines go up to their house, and it says they burnt them. In essence, they locked them inside their house, lit the house on fire, and killed them in a horrifying way. And again, as I would say, the Philistines were not nice people. That's what you see there. But the revenge doesn't stop there. Verse 7, Samson said to them, "Since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease." So he attacked them hip and thigh with great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. This whole thing started out with Samson going where he shouldn't go. Right? One little sin. And now an innocent woman and her father have been killed with fire, and Samson is not finished yet. Right? He tells them, he looks at him, he says, "Hey, I'm going after revenge now." This has gotten serious, and this leads us to the fourth thing Samson does, is he slaughters many Philistines. Right? All bets are off at this point. Samson is extremely angry, and I think it's interesting. The Philistines do something, Samson does something, the Philistines do something, Samson does something, and now we have gotten to this point. Every time things get more serious, every time things get a little more bloodthirsty as we go. It says in this passage that Samson told them, "I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." And he attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them hip to thigh. But what does that mean? King James, I think, says it best. King James, New King James, with the smoting them hip to thigh, because it's a metaphor that basically means they were taken apart. Right? What did Samson do at this point in time? He ripped them apart. Arms and legs. Ripped them apart. Strongest man who ever lived. Ripped them apart. Arms over here, legs over here, heads over there, torsos over there. It was not a pretty picture. Who did he kill? It doesn't tell us exactly. We would assume whoever it was that came and burnt his wife and his father-in-law. His wife and his father-in-law, again, she wasn't married to him, but he thought they were. So we would assume it would be those people. We don't know how far it went. Did he kill all the people in the town? Did he kill all the people who tried to stop him? How many people did he kill? We know he massacred a lot of people. And it was a pretty awful massacre. And he went down, and then he stayed in the cave in the rock of Edom. All we see so far is revenge, 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 revenge. And now Samson goes and stays in a cave, which seems odd. Why did he hide in the cave? I think he was scared. Right? I think he probably got to the point in all of this revenge, and once again, he cooled off a little bit, and he looked around, and he's standing there in a mess of arms and legs, and he thinks to himself, "Whoa, probably shouldn't have done this." Right? This is bad. Right? Maybe he's upset about what the Philistines are going to come do to him. Maybe he's worried about what his mom and dad are going to come say to him. Right? He has definitely crossed a whole bunch of lines at this point in time. And so he goes and he hides. And that's the strange thing here about Samson. Although he's a violent killer in one moment, he's scared of what's going to happen the next. And he's gone down from the very top about as far as he can go. Right? He is now at, you could say, rock bottom as he hides in the cave. Right? He has become nothing more than a violent, bloodthirsty killer. Not at all this man of promise that he was meant to be. As we wrap things up this morning, we look at verse 9. It said that the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. They've gone up there now at this point in time to capture Samson. They've gone up there at this point in time to get additional revenge against the Israelites. Remember, the Israelites are under the rule of the Philistines. They're under the thumb. And so essentially, the king of the Philistines looks around and he says, wait a minute. My crops have been burned. My people have been literally ripped apart. Gather the army. We're going to go show them who's in charge. Right? We are going to kill all the Israelites who are involved with Samson, and we're going to get Samson while we're at it as well. We are going to go take them out. We're done messing around. And that's where we're going to stop it today. I said, again, we're not going to have time to go much further. But I would leave you with the thought that, again, this all started with one little sin. Right? Samson went where he shouldn't have went. Right? Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Is that how that song goes? Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. He goes where he shouldn't have went. It all started off so easily. Right? And sometimes that little sin can start off so easily. It's a little white lie. It's a little time on the internet. It's taking a little something that doesn't belong to us. Right? It's watching a little something that we shouldn't watch. Who knows what it is? Who knows what that sin that you struggle with is? But it just takes a little sin. And then it starts that snowball effect. Right? We've all seen it. We've all seen those Looney Tune cartoons. Right? Somebody gets caught up in a very little snowball and it just keeps rolling down the hill, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it rolls by things, it gets kind of sucked into the snowball, and it just adds to it. And pretty soon everything in this snowball's path that had nothing to do with the snowball in the first place is getting sucked into this gigantic rolling snowball. That is the picture of what we see here today. That is the picture. It all started off as one little sin. Samson went somewhere he shouldn't, and now he has killed a whole bunch of Philistines, ripping them limb from limb, and his people are about to get killed by the Philistine army, which is all riled up about it. That's where we've got to. Right? That is the wages of sin, by the way. Death. There's death all around them at this point in time. Death all around them. It's why it's so important, and Scripture reminds ourselves time and time again to guard ourselves against sin. Right? Because it's not necessarily that first little tiny sin that takes you down. It's what happens next. And what happens next. And what happens next. We must strive to guard ourselves against even those simple sins. And we always need to look to God for the strength to do just that. Let's go ahead and we'll close out with the word of prayer.